Ladies and gentlemen, Christoph the Polish Geek says Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year, because this is actually the very last video of this year that I'm actually making, because afterwards I'm going to Paris to celebrate Christmas with my sister and her kids, and then we're going skiing for New Year, which is going to be exciting, but yes, I decided that it will be perfect to conclude this year with another video in the You Should Be Watching series, and I decided to give it to a foreign movie, actually, a Russian movie, and also a Christmas movie in some ways. Initially, I actually wanted to give a You Should Be Watching treatment to my favorite Polish movie of all time, Krzyżacy, Knights of the Teutonic Order. I already talked about it when I did my top 10 favorite Polish movies of all time, but I ultimately decided that this movie seems far more accessible than any of the Polish movies. So I will no doubt talk about Krzyżacy at some point in some other of my favorite Polish movies of all time. There is no doubt about that, but because I realized that this Russian classic from the 60s called Morozko, which in English to translate to Father Frost, although the English translation seems Jack Frost for some reason, whatever, let's just say Morozko, because I realized that Morozko is actually far more accessible than any of the Polish movies, so let's focus on that. And before we get to it, I'll now tell a little bit of my history with Russia, actually, because my parents, when I was like a young teenager, like from 12 to like 15 around, my parents actually lived in Ukraine then, because my dad happened to have a job there. So yes, he was like an expat in Ukraine when I was like from 12 to 15, and so yes, because of that I did live in Ukraine for a few years, and then later when I lived in the United States, my parents on the other hand lived in Moscow, Russia, because that's then when his job moved him. And so while I lived in the United States, I did visit my parents a couple of times in Moscow, and I have to say, Russia is a very beautiful country with rich, beautiful culture and really nice people. I'm not going to talk about the government, that's a really controversial subject, but I am a strong believer in what I'm always saying: separate government from the people. And as I said, people-wise and culture-wise, Russia is a very beautiful country with rich culture and really nice people. And I actually have some friends both in Russia and Ukraine. And all I'm saying, I really hope this war finally ends. Like, I'm just with civilians on both sides, and I really pray this war will finally be over soon. We'll see how Trump negotiations go, but enough this negative talk. Let's now talk about Morozko, which is basically like you could say pre-Christmas movie, because this is basically like Christmas that instead of using Christianity, it basically uses Eastern European, Slovakian folktales. Father Frost, or how it would be known in Russian as Morozko, is very much a fairy tale. My friend, European Lore, has actually reviewed the movie some time ago, and I'm going to agree with everything he said in his review. Like, this is like those type of fairy tales that we have been told in Eastern Europe as little kids. Those are types of fairy tales that our grandparents would tell us at bedtime. Type of fairy tales that we as children kind of believed in. We're told, for example, that there is a Baba Yaga in the forest and we would all be afraid to go there. We'll get to that soon enough, actually. This is very much a type of the movie I would totally recommend if you truly want to experience Slavic Eastern European lore and mythology. This is type of the movie that very much doesn't get more Eastern European and more Slavic than that. This is type of the movie, a basically Christmas movie before Christmas, like pre-Christianity Christmas. This is type of movie that if you are from Eastern Europe, you just wish you could go back in time to your childhood without such a huge access to information, without internet, and just imagine hearing those folktales again and feel the wonder. Just imagine lying as a little kid on the couch and listening to your grandmother or grandfather telling you that type of a folktale. And this is also a type of the movie that they won't even make in these days. The music and songs in the movie are fabulous. It's a typical Russian folk music, and it's so wonderful. It is so immersive and so wonderful and so catchy, and it is just pleasure to just listen to it. The photography is also very nicely done, and the costumes and sets are colorful and quite wondrous, very fairy tale-like, folk tale-like in atmosphere, which makes perfect sense because the movie very much is a folk tale, and because it's a movie from the 60s in the Soviet Union, the movie is all practical effects, since back when it was made, there was no CGI. And as a result, while it does look kind of dated, but at the same time, that's actually much better than a lot of modern CGI. The nature and forest and the river all look beautiful, and they're all real and filmed in the actual location somewhere in Russia. The story of the movie is great. It's a typical fairy tale story, but there is surprisingly a good amount of character development, because in fairy tales you don't often associate fairy tales with character development, but I say in this there is a pretty good amount. Ivan starts out as a very self-centered and full of himself before going for a well-done character development and becoming a very good person. There are typical fairy tale cliches in this story, like there is Baba Yaga, played wonderfully by a male actor, Georgi Miller. And by the way, this is a detail you have to know to truly appreciate it. Baba Yaga is a type of character from Slavic folklore who lives somewhere in the middle of the forest and kidnaps travelers, or in more extreme scenarios, eats children. Kind of like a Slavic version of the witch from Hansel and Gretel's story. Like, in fact, when I was a little kid, my grandparents often actually used the term Baba Yaga instead of the witch. And there is also a girl named Nastya who lives with her father, stepmother, and stepsister, and her stepmother very much hates her and bullies her and favors her own daughter, whom she spoils. Probably sounds like a Cinderella story, and influence most certainly is there. It's much more Russian style, however, and there is, of course, Father Frost, too, who could be seen as proto-Gandalf. I mean, the Lord of the Rings books have been out for 10 years already, but certainly a proto-Gandalf on the big screen, I mean. Father Frost is also a fairy tale character who actually is one of the characters that inspired Santa Claus. Sure, a Roman Catholic saint, Nicholas, is a major inspiration, but Father Frost most certainly also played a part in forming the modern Santa Claus. And I know that in the Russian culture, Eastern Orthodox, Christmas is celebrated later. The acting in this movie is surprisingly good. I mean, the actors are practically unknown in the United States and the rest of the Western world, but they were pretty famous in the Soviet Union. That's where they were from, actually. And for example, Alexandr Fela does a really great job as Ivan, and Natalia Siedich does a wonderful job as Nastya, and then Eduard Uzotov does an awesome job as Father Frost. Yep, those actors are practically unknown in the United States, but again, they do a very good job in this movie, and the visuals are very beautiful. I did already talk a little bit about them. I love the landscapes of the forest there and the lake, as well as the snowy forest and all that. And as I already said before, everything was filmed in the real, actual, beautiful natural locations all over Russia. The movie is pretty funny too, actually. There is some comedy in the movie as well, and I think it's really well done. And where can you watch the movie? It's actually not hard. It's actually on YouTube. All you need to do is put Morozko in the YouTube search and voila, you found it. And you can actually watch in the English translation, but I very much recommend watching it in the original Russian language. Like, the original Russian version is just sounds so much better in every way, shape or form. In fact, I've seen parts of the English translation and I actually think the English translation very much butchers it, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't like the movie at all, because honestly, I very much don't like the English translation of the movie. I personally very much recommend watching it in the original Russian with English subtitles. It just sounds so much better and more natural. That's at least my recommendation. When I watched this movie as a kid, I actually watched it in Russian with a Polish lecturer, because yeah, I actually been watching this movie as a little kid couple of times actually when it was on TV in Poland, and yes, it was in Russian with a Polish lector. A lector is like this guy that basically just like voice over the characters and translates what they are saying, even if the characters still actually speak their native language. That's what a lector is, and when I was a kid, it was very much a huge thing in Poland. But I think Morozko is a really amazing movie, and in some ways it feels like, in addition to being very much a classic Eastern European fairy tale, it also feels like in some ways as a prototype for some modern fantasy movies, with having a hero, a princess, and then a mentor figure. Yep, I very much recommend this movie. It's really awesome, and certainly much better than almost all of modern Hollywood. Morozko is a really great movie, and it very much brings me to my childhood, and it very much might bring you as well if you grew up in Eastern Europe like me. On the other hand, if you live in the United States or maybe somewhere in Western Europe, I think this is a perfect movie to watch if you want to experience Slavic culture and some of our folklore. And as I said, this movie is available on YouTube, so watching and finding it shouldn't be that hard. You just have to put Morozko in the YouTube search, and also there is both a Russian and an English translation. I personally very much prefer to watch the Russian version. Actually, from what I heard even, because I didn't actually touch the English version, because from what I heard, apparently the English dub very much butchers a lot of the things, so yeah, I'm not touching that, especially that I actually do speak a bit of Russian, so it's not even that much of a problem for me to watch the original Russian version. So yes, I think the best way to experience it is in the original Russian with English subtitles, if you don't speak Russian, and you most certainly don't. So yes, I very much recommend Morozko, especially as I said, if you truly want to experience Eastern European folktales and also my childhood, because again, this is one of those movies I've been watching a lot in my old childhood. It was like showing every Christmas here in Poland. So that concludes another You Should Be Watching video. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for checking this out, and this is the very last video of the year that I'm making, because now, afterwards tomorrow, I'm actually going away to Paris to celebrate Christmas with my sister and her kids, which I'm really looking forward to. So yes, this is the very last video of the year, and I think it's a perfect way to conclude this year. And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this video, and Merry Christmas to you all, and a Happy New Year, and
Merry Christmas.
So a Merry Christmas to you anyway, Uncle.
Good evening.
And a Happy New Year.
Good evening. Humbug!
talk to you in the new year when I come back. Likely with a review of Nosferatu, actually. See you in the new year.